Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Melanie Dizon. I'm the Director of Education with the Davis-Phinney Foundation, and today I am here with one of our fabulous ambassadors, Amy Carlson. How you doing, Amy?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. So today we're going to talk about something that probably happens to a lot of people with Parkinson's, is that they are taking one medication and out of nowhere something happens that they weren't expecting, that puts a real kink in their medication schedule and what they're able to do and take to live well. So I know that this recently happened to you. I want to hear your story. I know that everybody else does too. Just want you to start out. And first of all, the most important point, what is a formulary?
Well, that's exactly a great question because I had no idea that there even was such a thing. I'd never heard of it. And what happened is I went to Walgreens, like I always do, to get my Ropinirole XR or XR ER refilled, and they said, "Oh, your insurance company doesn't cover this drug." And I went, "They covered it last month." And they really weren't very helpful. They just said, well, you have to call your insurance company. So I called my insurance company and they said, yeah, we're not covering that anymore. And I'm like, how does that work? And that's when I figured out that there's this thing called a formulary. And the formulary, as I understand it, is a list of drugs that the insurance company will cover. And it talks about tiers. And there's tier 1 drugs, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4, something like that. Tier 1 drugs are easy, no problem. Tier 2 drugs are also fairly easy, no problem. But then you get to 3 and 4 and things get a little bit more problematic. And your prescription is not the end all of the thing. I always thought if your doctor wrote you a prescription, you're in, right? You know. And I had heard, generics versus brand names. I think most of us run into that like smack dab right in the beginning. You don't get to take the brand name, Requip, you get to take the generic called Ropinirole. Fine. For most people, that's okay. I have a problem with sometimes with that. I won't go into the details on that, but I think there's a difference between generics and brands, and it's important to know that. But that's not...
Real quick before you go on, when they said to you your insurance no longer covers it, were they like, oh, but you can pay out of pocket? Was that an option, or was it like just not even possible?
They assumed that I wouldn't want to.
Got it.
So they just assumed that I would go talk to my insurance company, which I assumed too. So I called, so when I'm on the phone with the insurance company and I'm saying, well, if you don't cover Ropinirole XR, which is the generic, I thought this was some sort of mix-up. No, it is the generic, but no, we don't cover it anymore. So what do you cover? And he said, well, you mean an extended release? And I said, yes, an extended release. And that's when he said, well, we're not covering Ropinirole anymore. We're covering another drug called Nupro. And I thought, well, this is really odd, because to me, Ropinirole and Nupro are not at all the same thing. Nupro is a patch. Ropinirole XR is a pill, and also, I mean, this is completely different route of entry for drugs. I mean, everything was different. So I thought, this is very odd. And so I started doing research, and I was like, well, who made this decision? So I'm on the phone with the insurance company saying, well, who decided?
Yeah, because it went from a tier 1 or tier 2 drug to a tier 3 or 4 drug, like
something like that, except I thought, well, and that was that. I'm still confused about all of this because I've done a lot of research. I said, who made that decision? And so then I found out there's these committees called pharmacy and therapeutic committees of some sort, PNT, and they make the decision about the formulary. And for my insurance company, and I think for most, they meet 4 times a year. And twice a year, the formulary changes. And the idea is that if a new drug is approved or something changes with the FDA, the formulary is adapted to include new drugs, drop drugs that have been taken off. And I guess, and this is where it gets kind of, my knowledge is a little fuzzy, they also trying to take a look at costs. and how much drugs cost and try to balance costs in drugs for the insurance company. Now, I'm not exactly sure exactly how that works. I do know that the committees, the PNT committees, are put up, they're not people who work for the pharmaceutical company per se, so they're supposed to be able to make independent decisions. So there you are. So then I thought, well, do these people know anything about Parkinson's? And so I started researching who was on the committee at my insurance company. And they look like very studied and intelligent people, but not one of them was a movement disorder specialist. In fact, I think there was 12 people on the committee that I looked at, and there was like 2 that knew something about neurology or had some neurological background. Okay, so now I'm sitting here relying on 2 people who have some sort of neurological background to make decisions about pharmaceutical. This was very enlightening to me, because I know that my doctor and I spend an enormous amount of time deciding what drug I should take and why I take it. And the fact that now a very common drug that I know a lot of people are on is suddenly off the list baffles me.
And they're off the list for your insurance, but they might not necessarily be off for other people's insurance.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
This is my personal list, or,
Yeah.
seemingly. And then that's when I figured out that insurance companies have multiple formularies. It depends on what policy you have. And so it's very complicated very quickly. And then they tell you, well, you can appeal the decision. So you can go to your doctor and appeal. And so I thought, well, okay, we'll just appeal it. So we did. And I did find out that there's a really important word. When you appeal, if you use the word urgent, they have to make the decision, at least in my policy, they had to make the decision in 72 hours. If you don't use the word urgent, they get 30 days.
That is good to know. And also, was the paperwork to file an appeal complicated? Was it pretty straightforward?
Yeah. When I called my doctor, she said, we'll take care of it on our end. So I did not actually see the paperwork. They took care of it. Now, my appeal was denied. And the denial was, our appeal was this well-written, 2 paragraphs, very readable. You could understand exactly what they're saying. And their denial was the same sentence written 4 times, repeated 4 times, and all it said is, this is no longer on our formulary. And they just said that 4 times. So I've never got a clear answer as to why my appeal was denied, and I'm still working on that. And obviously this is all very interesting to me now in general. But it's good to know this stuff before it happens, because like I said, I'm still completely shocked. And then I did more research, and the situation baffles me even further. Because if I look, so you can buy drugs with cash, right? You don't have to have an insurance company pay for your medication. You can buy it yourself. If I were to buy my drug for a month, it's about $200 to $300 for the month. If I were to buy the drug that they approve, that's on the formulary, it would be closer to $1,000 a month. So now I'm very confused. I'm like, why would you want me to change to a more expensive drug? Now, there's also the possibility that I could go to the non-extended release version of the drug, which is probably what our current plan is now. If the appeal of the appeal does not go through, is that I might just change from the extended release to the regular release. But let me tell you something about that. I take 7 pills every morning at 6:30 in the morning, and I take 9 pills at night at 10:30 at night. In between there, I take 5 doses of Sinemet spaced throughout the day. So now what we're talking about is adding extra doses of Ropinirole throughout the day. Now, hopefully they line up with my Sinemet, but they may not in timing. So that's going to add to my pill regimen. And in addition, Sinemet has a chewable form. which makes life a little easier. As far as I know, ropinirole doesn't. So we're back to the find a glass of water trial. So I think the whole thing for me is extremely interesting because I look at this more, certainly it's a problem that people with Parkinson's have to deal with because we take a lot of medication and they're expensive and insurance companies are always making changes about these things. So we have to deal with that. But I also think that we as patients need to start being thoughtful about the fact that our disease is very complicated. And I think this is where advocacy comes into play, because I think insurance companies need to hear from us that this is hard and this is hardship. And if you don't complain, if you do exactly what they say every time, and you don't at least, I mean, I'm not saying you don't do what they say, do what they say, but give them feedback. This is hard. This is not easy. This is costing me money. This is costing me time. When I think about if I were to make the change from ropinirole XR to Nupro, okay, let's break that down. I take enough ropinirole that I cannot just stop. I have to titrate down. So it would probably take me about 3 weeks to get off ropinirole. Now, during that time, I'm now no longer medicated in this fine state that you see me in now, right? I'm going to be under-medicated, and we'll be trying to play the game of catching up with Sinemet. But that never goes well, okay? For somebody with advanced Parkinson's, it's a real balance. It's a lot of work, okay? So then I finally get clear of the ropinirole. Then I can start this Nupro. But again, you can't jump to the level you need to be at. You have to work your way up. And now this is a drug you've never taken before, so you don't know how you react to it. So it takes longer to titrate up and really get to a good dose. So maybe we're talking 4 weeks, best case. So I'm talking about 2 months here of my life to change to this drug. And that means 2 months of completely unpredictable days, which I find, well, you know, first world problems, but that's intolerable. You know, I mean, I'm lucky enough to get the drugs, so I try not to complain too much, but it still seems really like somebody wasn't really knowledgeable about what they're asking me to do.
Right. So that actually brings up a point. Did they give you, I mean, it sounds like you didn't get a lot of warning. And so when, you know, people are thinking about this, like you just showed up at your thing to fill it. Luckily, I think you had some extra to get you through the month, but the fact of the matter is, like, you were just blindsided with it. And so
yeah,
the option then of not doing the other is being unmedicated. It's not an option. That's not an option. They say it's an option. That's not an option.
Imagine what would have happened. I mean, here's a couple scenarios, right? Let's say that I was out of ropinirole, and I went and I found this information. Now I've got nothing. Okay, I can't just not take my ropinirole. That's a really bad idea.
Right.
Going cold turkey off of any neurological drug is typically a bad idea, but definitely for the agonists, it's not a good idea. You've got to titrate down. So that would have been some sort of, I don't know what we would have done. Probably I would have bought it with cash, right? And that assumes I have the resources, which I'm lucky enough to have, but somebody else may not.
Right.
And these are expensive drugs.
Yeah.
So now I'm titrating down, and I have to get a hold of my doctor, and I have to figure out the new plan. Well, most MDSs aren't just waiting for you to call. It takes time to get in.
Right.
So this could have been a real urgent issue, and I was just lucky enough to catch it by happenstance.
Right.
Early in the game. There are other ways to solve this problem. Not all of them are. I mean, you can buy drugs from other countries. There are legal issues with that. Nobody that I know of has ever been prosecuted, but that doesn't mean it's not illegal. All right, buy drugs from Canada or from wherever, where they're at least less expensive than they are here in the States. But yeah, this could have been, I mean, for me, this could have been a much bigger issue, and it's still a pretty big issue.
Yeah, it's not on over yet. So you have a second appeal. going and hoping that that has a different result. But if not, you're going to kind of start that process. I definitely want to hear back. We want to hear back in part 2 of this after you kind of figure out what your next step is. And we also want to hear from people. If you've gone through this, we want to hear about it. Definitely send me a message and let me know and tell us your story and tell us if you had a success, like what you did to make, to make it work. And if you got an appeal that was actually, I guess, accepted, we want to know that.
Well, and I also would encourage everybody to consider the idea. I've been posting about this on Facebook, so I've gotten some different reactions from people, and I've got a number of stories of people who successfully made a transition to another drug. Now, they don't necessarily have Parkinson's; these are people maybe with some other issue. But I thought to myself, that's a really interesting thing that you successfully transferred to another drug at your insurance company's request, not at your doctor's advice. And I think to me, that feels wrong. I mean, I really consider my doctor an expert, and I really don't consider my insurance company necessarily an expert on my medication. Okay, and I'm not saying they're not knowledgeable. I'm sure that they're very knowledgeable. But when it comes down to my care, I just am really questioning and never realized how much power the insurance company has over your care. And I wonder if that's what we really want.
Good question. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Melanie.